My name isn't important. I'm 54 years old, and I've been driving big rigs for over 23 years now, since my wife passed away. In all that time, I've seen some odd things out in the open road. Some good, some bad, some ugly, and some things you just can't explain away or figure out what the hell it was. Now, driving a truck isn't just my vocation. It's my life. I love the open road. I love going all over this beautiful country. Now I basically live in my truck. I don't really have a home to go home to, although I do maintain an address at my sister's house in Shreveport, Louisiana. I've always been a bit of a loner and a nomad of sorts, so this lifestyle suits me well. I have a 4-year-old pit bull Great Dane mix that rides with me. Her name is Lucy. She's a big old baby, but her size and build tend to make folks a little wary. And she's got a big voice. And a worse bite, but that's only if need be. I'm not a tall man, but I'm stocky. I'm 5'6" and 220 pounds. I can take care of myself. I take care of my body. I'm very fit for my age. Not fat, just sort of thick and wide. But what I ran into that cold November night, it tested me to my limits. It tested Lucy to her limits too. I believe if it was not for God and my dog, I would have been just another unsolved highway mystery. I was coming out of Laredo, Texas, where I dropped off my 16th load at a facility there, and I was deadheading back to Dallas, Texas to get another load. You see, I really favor the longer runs, but the money and the drive was easy, so I took this one, and it had a 20-load contract. Now in all this time, nothing out of the ordinary had happened to me. All was going good. Hell, almost too good. Little did I know I would literally be fighting for my life and very soul later that night. I'd stopped off at this little roadside rest area north of Cotulla, Texas. I wanted to get a little nap before going into San Antonio on I-35. It was a little chilly and overcast, but the traffic was rather light that evening. I was the only truck there. There was nobody else around. I'd stopped there before because it was quiet. At a place like that, you don't have the lot ladies knocking on your door in the middle of the night to wake you up. And Lucy don't like parking lot ladies. I think the poor girl gets jealous. I got out and I let Lucy out to do her business. It was just a rest area there. There were no restrooms, but there were some picnic tables and trash cans and a parking lot. Past that, there was nothing but mesquite and scrub brush. It was kind of desolate, which is exactly why I liked it. I let Lucy run loose, sniffing around while I walked her there, and she did her business. We played a bit, and then she went and jumped back into the truck. I was going to get in and bed down, but I suddenly had to take a whiz. So I pushed the passenger door open and walked over to the scrub, kind of out of sight. When I got done and I came out of the bushes, I lit up a smoke as I walked to the truck. About that time, I noticed a figure standing there. She was standing by one of the picnic tables, about 30 feet away from me. I could tell that this was a female, but she was dressed in all black with a hoodie on, and a little bit of blonde hair sticking out around her face. There was a few lights there, but it wasn't really bright. Still, you could see fair enough. She was slim built, tall, maybe 115, 120 pounds, maybe about 5'11". She had rather fair skin. I could tell because I could see her face even in the dim light. And then she spoke to me. She asked me for a cigarette. I walked over to her and handed her one, struck up my lighter and held it out for her. She cupped her hands around mine to shield the wind. That's when I noticed her hands were like ice. And this woman, she had an odd tone, an inflection in her voice, kind of like a foreign accent. I asked her where her car was. She said she was just out walking. I asked from where, and she said from Cotulla. Now, I'd just come from there, so I would have seen her walking on the side of the highway. It's not every day you see a woman just walking along the highway. With the lights I got on this truck, it lights up the entire roadside. and I didn't see anything. She was holding her face kind of down, and her blonde hair was in her face. She did this the whole time she smoked that cigarette. You can see from her cheeks down, but you couldn't see her eyes. There wasn't really anything threatening about her at first. Sure, she was a little odd, but not threatening. So I asked her, "You're just out walking down the interstate in the middle of nowhere at 10 o'clock? Isn't that kind of dangerous?" Then she let out this weird laugh and replied that she wasn't afraid of anything or anyone, here or anywhere else. "But maybe you should be," she said to me. I thought, what the hell is she talking about? Then she tilted her head up and she snarled at me like some kind of animal. I instinctively stepped back as she lunged at me with these claw-like hands. I thought this girl was crazy or on drugs or something. But then I saw her eyes. They were solid black, and she came screaming at me like a madwoman, her mouth open with these teeth that looked all jagged and sharp, like a witch or a monster or something else. I was backing up, trying to keep her off of me. I punched her dead center in her chest as hard as I could. It knocked her back, but only for a second. This thing went from looking like a young woman to having the appearance of a demonic creature. And this thing told me, "You're going to die here tonight, and there's not a thing you can do about it." Then she came at me again with those claws and teeth, trying to tear into my flesh. She tried to get close enough to bite me. I felt its claws dig into my arm through my jacket as it grabbed me. I was trying my hardest to keep it pushed off of me. But this thing was every bit as strong as I was. It bit at me. It tore at me, and literally tossed me across the ground, and I landed with a thud and rolled about 15 feet away from it. Then it laughed as it came closer to me. Then, suddenly, my surprise and terror gave way to anger and rage. I knew this thing was no human, but something else, something evil, a pure predator straight from hell. I jumped to my feet and squared off with this thing, ready to fight it, and to kill it if I had to, not just defend myself from it. It must have sensed that I was no longer in fear of it, and my intent on beating it was apparent, because this thing hissed at me as it circled around. It told me, "You're not strong enough, old man. Nobody is here to help save you from me. This is where you die. I'm gonna take your soul. There's nothing that you can do about it." And then this thing let out the most ungodly scream I've ever heard. This scream shook me to my very core. And this thing came at me full tilt. When it closed in, I front kicked it as hard as I could with my boot heel in its gut. It let out a grunt as it fell backwards. I closed in myself and stomped it right in the face, and went to kicking and stomping on it as I screamed in rage. This thing screamed in pain and rolled over, clawing to get away from me. I'll be honest, I was cussing at this thing and calling for God to help me at the same time. It scrambled away from me as I chased after it. Then it laughed, jumped up, and turned around. What I saw was even more horrifying than what I had seen earlier. Its face was bloody. Its eyes were jet black, and they were shining in the light as it shrieked and charged at me again. I ran at it too, screaming as well, and we collided, and it threw me down and landed on top of me. Its cold hands wrapped around my throat as it screamed and banged my head against the ground. I was swinging like a madman, trying to get it off of me, hitting it in the head as hard as I could. I finally dug my thumbs into its evil eyes as hard as I could. And I must have heard it, 'cause it let go and rolled off of me, and it ran into the scrub brush into the dark. I scrambled back towards my truck, trying to get away, and trying to get my gun. I keep a sawed-off 12-gauge pump shotgun in the cab, and I had every intention of using it on this thing if it came back before I could get out of there. I was all but spent from fighting this thing. I finally could hear Lucy barking and going crazy up in the truck. Just as I reached up and grabbed the door handle, I got hit like a freight train from this thing. It hit me from the back. I hit the asphalt hard with the back of my head, and I saw stars for a good second. I looked up, and this thing was all bloody, standing over me. It was heaving for air, looking down at me with those black eyes. And it growled at me. "You ain't getting away from me." I rolled under the truck to get away and came up on the passenger side as it came around from the front screaming. I opened the door and called out, "Lucy, fish it, girl." That's the word I use for her to attack and defend. When she hears that, whatever I point to, it's its worst nightmare. She goes from a big baby, close to 200 pounds, to a fury of muscle and teeth and claws, hell-bent on tearing your ass apart. Lucy flew out of the truck like a monster right on top of that thing, knocking it on its back. Her jaws were around this thing's throat, shaking it like a rag doll as it screamed bloody murder, kicking and clawing for its life. It broke loose and tried to get away, but Lucy was all over it, biting and ripping into this demon creature's back. I reached into the cab and grabbed my shotgun. I went back towards them as they fought there on the ground. I called Lucy off, and she broke contact coming back to me, jumping up and hackled, but still ready to fight some more. The demon thing was still steady, though, trying to get to the scrub brush on all fours. It was coughing up blood and moving with its clothes ripped to shreds and bleeding like a stuck hog. I walked up on it as it was crawling away. It was speaking some kind of language that sounded like gibberish. I shot it in the back of the knee, and it shook on the ground, screaming in pain, looking up at me with fear in its black eyes. "You got something or someone to fear now, you witch." I shot it again on the other knee. It laid there whimpering with its hands up at me like it was begging for mercy. The fact that this thing had a woman's face again is the only reason I didn't blow its head off. I went back to the truck and left it there at the edge of the scrub and got Lucy and myself up in the truck. When I looked over there, it was crawling off with its arms, dragging its legs behind it. I got the hell out of there as fast as my rig would go. About 15 miles down the road, I was shaking so bad I had to pull over on the side of the road. I just broke down, almost in complete hysterics. Lucy put her big old head under my arm, nudging me, and I just hugged her and petted her. We stayed there for a long time. If it wasn't for Lucy, that thing would have got me. Whatever these things are, they're not human. I finished the contract a week later, and on my last run, I stopped at that place again. Except this time, I was well armed. I had a .45 in my belt, and Lucy by my side. We looked around on the scrub, and we sat at that park bench that we saw her at for the first time for a good 30 minutes. But nothing happened. Maybe it died out in the scrub somewhere. Or maybe it's out in a hole healing up somewhere. But if I ever run into that black-eyed witch again, it's gonna be the one that's scared, not me. Near as I can figure, it's a witch that's possessed by a succubus demon or something along those lines. I honestly don't know what or who she was. All I know is that she was fast and damn strong. It tossed me like I was a rag doll, and like I said, I'm over 200 pounds. She was a small young woman. Sounded young too, but only in the beginning. After she attacked, her voice got really deep and screechy, like the demons that you see on TV. You could feel it, as well as hear it. I was scared. I'm talking pure terror. It's the first time in my life I ever felt that feeling in my gut, like my heart was going to bust. If I had given into it, instead of getting mad as hell, it would have had me. It would have killed me and dragged me off into that scrub. I had a heavy Carhartt-type coat on when it happened. Thick cotton duck material. If it hadn't been for that coat, she would have ripped me to hell. Those claws were nasty. The arms of that coat are ripped and torn where I was fending her off. Every time I hit her, I was going as hard as I could. Like I said, it would kind of stun her, but she kept on attacking me. That steel-toed boot hurt her, though. I could tell. She felt that thing for sure, because I kicked the hell out of her. When it came off the ground and it flew back at me, I know I hurt her. When it got me down and was choking me and banging my head on the ground, I was hitting it in the head with both fists as hard and fast as I could. And it just kept on going. I can still feel those icy cold fingers around my throat and see those empty eyes and jagged teeth. I can still hear that screech. But when I went for her eyes, yeah, that hurt. It got her off of me. And then I went to stomping at her. I tried to stomp her to death, but this thing was resilient. And when it ran off on all fours, it looked like an animal. When it hit me from behind, it really took the wind out of my ass. I will never forget the look on that thing's face looking down at me. It was gasping for breath, but it was still laughing. If I hadn't heard Lucy's barking, I probably would have just passed out. But that dog wanted to protect me. She wanted to save my life. And that's exactly what she did. I've never seen Lucy that vicious. She was trying to kill that thing. And if I hadn't gotten the gun and called her off, who knows? Maybe she would have. The next day, though, I was bruised to hell. I had handprints bruised into my arms and neck, and black and blue bruises all over me. I hurt from head to toe for days after that. Every little sound woke me up for a while. My preacher said it was a demon-possessed woman. I guess it's possible. Its face shape-shifted from black-eyed to a monster. Whatever it was hurt bad and bleeding all over the place. I doubt it lived, to be honest. But I don't know for sure. Like I said, I went back to that place, but of course it was during the daylight. Still didn't find anything. And this time, Lucy wasn't agitated either. It had to be something evil and nasty. It was hell-bent on killing anyone that it attacked. I really think I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I just happened to stop there where it was. Maybe it thought I was an easy target. Who knows? This thing never told me its name. Like it would anyway. I don't want it to tell me its name. All I want is to never encounter this thing again. Thank you. My story happens in Aztec, New Mexico. Aztec, New Mexico. Sounds like a crappy little town, doesn't it? But truth be told, when we first got there, it was awesome. We were having a visit for my in-laws, and I was just with my husband, just the four of us. My in-laws have a lot of land, and there wasn't a lot around, especially not a lot of people. I think the closest people around were about a mile away. At first, the trip was really good. I got to bond with my in-laws, which was really cool because over the last few years, I didn't really get to see them a lot. I'd known them for a long time, about 9 years, but they were always just my in-laws. A quiet week with them was the only thing I wanted, but a quiet week with them is nothing close to what I actually received. The night before everything happened, we saw this gigantic coyote. I mean, this thing was the size of a wolf. It wasn't a dog, and it wasn't a wolf. It was definitely a coyote. I know what they look like, but the size of this thing was like nothing I'd ever seen on a coyote before. And from the very beginning of the encounter with this gigantic coyote, my father-in-law was just acting really, really weird. I'd never seen this man scared, but scared he was nonetheless. And when my husband asked him about it, he said nothing ever follows a coyote that's any good. Where they go, bad things happen. The next night, before all hell broke loose, we were actually having a really nice dinner. A dinner that I actually helped cook, which was kind of a big deal, because my mother-in-law doesn't allow anybody in the kitchen. And my husband told me the fact that she let me in the kitchen meant that not only did she like me, But she loved me. I mean, she should, right? We've been married for 6 years at this point. Before we started eating, though, I noticed their animals started to act weird. They had a dog, and a cat, and even a bird. And I know that sounds kind of cliche, but everything I say is true. Now, the cat, we'll start with him. He's always ready for attention. This is the kind of cat that rubs your legs and meows when you're not paying attention to him, just waiting for somebody to scratch him behind the ears. But this cat was hiding. That's not like him at all. And the dog, who's usually just really laid back unless you're going out for a walk or throwing the ball, was pacing around and whining. I figured he just wanted some of the food we were cooking because it really did smell delicious, and the poor guy just wanted a taste, right? Well, with everything that happened after that, food was probably the last thing on this pooch's mind. And then this little bird that they had. I think it was a parakeet or something like that. There was this little house that my father-in-law actually built by hand and put in his enclosure, and this bird was hiding in it. Now usually, again, this bird is always out doing, whatever it is birds do. But he was hiding in this little birdhouse and wouldn't come out for anything during dinner. We didn't even get to finish this amazing dinner that I helped cook because during dinner, all 4 of us heard my husband's name being called out. He got up naturally because he heard his name and went to the door to see who it was. Now remember, the closest neighbor is about a mile from this house, so it was weird that anybody was outside calling to my husband who didn't even know anybody around there, so why would they be calling his name? My father-in-law stopped him before he could reach the door. He said he could not go outside. And when he asked why, his father said, "That's not who anybody thinks it is. There's a creature out there that wants to do us harm." I started laughing. I don't believe in any of that crap. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in monsters. I'm scientific. I have to see to believe. I asked who it was out there, and my mother-in-law said the question isn't who, it's what is out there. I wanted to laugh again, but then we heard this tapping on the window. And it was like this malicious tapping from the very beginning, like something was trying to get our attention. Again, my husband went over to the window, but his parents were both there to stop him this time. My mother-in-law said this thing was here before, and she doesn't know exactly what it is, but it's some kind of evil creature. Still, I had a hard time believing all the crap that was coming out of their mouths, but my in-laws swore that they'd seen this thing before. It calls out the names of people, trying to lure them outside to do God knows what, and it's definitely not human. And then, all of a sudden, we heard something running around on the roof. They had a 1-story house, so the sounds of this thing running around were pretty loud and clear. I thought to myself, what in the hell was that? Who would be up on the roof running around? After that, I have to admit, even I was pretty creeped out. I didn't know who or what could get up there, especially that quickly. But there was definitely something or someone running around on top of that roof. Both of my in-laws told us we needed to stay inside, no matter what. No matter what we saw, no matter what we heard, whatever was out there was trying to get us to come out there. It wanted us to be out there with it. And again, they didn't know what it wanted, but promised it wasn't anything good. So I admit, I did start to panic. I'm not the best in a crisis. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was out there, but my mother-in-law was there to calm me down. She grabbed me by both of my hands, sat me down on the couch, and told me as long as we stayed inside, we'd be fine. She made me stare into her eyes and promised me that we'd get through the night. All we had to do was listen to their instructions and not do anything to make this thing mad. And again I whispered to her, "What is it that's out there?" She shook her head and said, "My love, I don't know what it is. I have a feeling of what it is, but I don't want to say that word out loud. I just know if we go out there, this thing is going to hurt us." Her words and the look on her face were enough for me. I wasn't going anywhere close to outside. I wasn't even going to go by the windows if I could help it. If this was some kind of creature, I didn't want to see it. Because like I said, if I saw it, I would believe in it. And I definitely didn't want to believe in some kind of monster that was out there that could mimic voices and jump on roofs. That was just too much for me to deal with. And if it turned out to be some kind of deranged serial killer, I still didn't want to go out there and have a face-to-face with it. Or him, or her. My husband went to our room that we were staying in, opened his suitcase and grabbed his gun. He said, whatever it was, the gun would take care of it. But my father-in-law very adamantly grabbed him by the arms and said, "No, son, you cannot go out there. You can't shoot your gun at this thing. You'll just make it mad." Both of my in-laws were afraid that if we angered this thing, naturally it would lead to death. And then they told us a story, or legend, whatever. I don't know what it was, but it didn't do anything to calm my nerves. In fact, it just creeped me out even more. They said a few years ago, this man shot at this same creature. He didn't kill it. I mean, obviously, since it was standing on our roof trying to kill us. And all it did was make this thing mad. And then suddenly, within a couple of days, this man dropped dead without any explanation. What kind of evil could be out there that causes a perfectly healthy man to just drop dead? Now, I'm not saying I believed in evil. I'm not saying I believed in a curse or whatever. Whatever they were talking about probably happened. But I didn't want to go out there and piss off whatever it was that was out there either. So I just sat on the couch with my mouth shut until my gaze met my husband's, and I told him he needed to just hold on to his gun. That he wasn't going out there, and if he did, he was going to be looking at divorce papers. Eventually, we looked out the window. Didn't see anything. And after that, we actually ended up looking out a bunch of times, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever this thing was. But each time, nothing was actually out there, even though we could hear the voice right outside. And I was starting to begin to doubt that anything was out there at all, except maybe somebody playing a prank on us. But then finally, when me and my husband looked out the window, we caught half a glimpse of this thing. We only caught a glimpse of the back end, but it was enough for me to scream. Whatever it was, I didn't see its face. I didn't see its head, I didn't see its shoulders or torsos or arms even. But I saw the back end. I saw legs. And these legs were incredibly skinny. They were flesh-colored, a little pale, but they were too long to be human. And I swear to you, the legs were moving in the way that it made it look like it was crawling on its hands and knees. Except it wasn't on its knees at all. It was running on its feet, like a person would do if they were trying to walk on all fours, but very fluid. I started to freak out again, and I asked what we could do. My father-in-law said we just had to let it be. To let this thing torment us throughout the night because it would be gone by dawn, and then we'd be safe again. So that's exactly what we did. This thing prowled around outside the house all night long. I mean, all night long, without ever quitting. We'd hear scratches at the front door. We'd hear scratches at the back door seconds after that. Scratches at the windows, across the walls. It was like it was dragging its nails on all these different places of the house. And then all of a sudden it'd be up on the roof again. It would stomp around, run back and forth. We'd hear these god-awful cries and screeches. And then what I could only describe as these hoarse, evil laughs. And then all of a sudden, it would be at the doors again, or the windows, tapping at them, or scratching at them, and everything would start all over. It was like it wanted to scare us. Like scaring us made it happy. But still, we let it do its thing. I was definitely not going outside. It started tapping on the windows again, and then it would bang on the doors like somebody that'd been trying to get in. And this happened for hours. My mother-in-law prayed a lot. I actually thought about praying too, but I still refused to give in to the beliefs that these people were trying to instill on me. I know it sounds stupid, but I guess I'm just hard-headed. I didn't know what to believe was outside. I was still unwilling to believe that there was a higher power, especially one that would allow us to be under attack by some kind of evil creature. Even if it wasn't physically attacking us, the emotional trauma that we were feeling was something that I've never experienced before. And I used to live in New York. After a while, we would hear all of our names being called. Mine, my husband's, my mother-in-law's, my father-in-law's. Each time one of our names would be called, we still refused to go outside. My husband and his family are Hispanic. They're fluent in Spanish. And I'd like to think I'm pretty fluent as well, so I could understand a lot of the things that were being said. Especially after all the English things that this creature was saying. It started speaking in Spanish too. It would call out our names in Spanish, asking for us to come outside in Spanish. We'd still refuse to go outside though, and then this thing changed its tactics once again. It started to sound like kids calling for help outside, in English and in Spanish, but still we didn't go outside. As much as I wanted to believe that there really was a child out there that needed my help, my mother-in-law and my father-in-law were there to remind me that it was just this creature outside that would do anything to lure one of us or all of us out there, and they were still adamant that we stay inside. We waited until sunup. It was the longest, most exhausting, and scary night of my entire life. This thing tormented us from the moment the sun went down to the moment the sun rose. But as soon as the sun came up, everything just stopped. The scratching, the banging, the calling, the screams, the noises on the roof. Even the animals went back to normal. The cat was rubbing on my leg like an attention whore, wanting to be pet, meowing to get my attention, just like normal. The dog wanted to be fed, and was running around like a doofus again, and even that little bird came out of its house. It's like nothing happened at all, but that was only after the sun came up. I didn't know what the hell was going on still at that point. I mean, I was at a complete loss for words. I was in the middle of a debate with my own soul about whether to believe this shit or to just think that somebody was screwing with us, causing the most elaborate prank that I've ever been witness to. But either way, we packed up all of our stuff because we were getting the hell out of there. We begged my in-laws to come, but they refused. Why in the hell would they refuse? Were they not there all night? Did they check out or something? Did they forget everything? Something was dicking with us the entire night. Something wanted to hurt us based off of their claims. And I say something because to this day I still don't know if it was a person or some kind of creature like they had wanted us to believe. I don't know what to believe. But regardless, we left. We went back to California. We didn't think about ever going back there again. My husband would check on my in-laws all the time though after that, making sure that they were okay, making sure that whatever it was that was out there that night didn't come back. But on 2 different occasions, over the course of 3 years, we got a phone call saying that this thing was back, but that both of the in-laws were okay, that they were inside and they were safe and they would stay there until sunrise. But last June, my father-in-law passed away. A lot of people that I tell these stories to say was that skinwalker or whatever they want to call it. But the truth is, he'd been diagnosed with cancer, and it didn't have anything to do with whatever the hell was out there. I still don't know what to believe, to this day. But either way, my father-in-law died from cancer. Lung cancer, to be specific. He'd smoked for the past 40-something years, and it wasn't anything supernatural that killed him. It wasn't anything paranormal. It wasn't a curse. It was just cancer. So he passed away, and my mother-in-law lives in one of those assisted living communities now. There's no signs of this creature anywhere, and I'd really like to keep it that way. We're never going back to Aztec, New Mexico. Especially now with my in-laws out of there, we don't even have a reason to go back. And that's fine with me. What I do know is something weird happened that night. Even after listening to some of your stuff that you recommended, I still don't believe in all of this. But the truth is, I don't know what to believe, because if I did believe in these things, It'd be terrifying. I guess it's just easier to deny the existence of these creatures because it's so fantastical that something like this could actually exist. Maybe one day I'll be convinced. But hopefully it's not because of another encounter. I want to know what the people that subscribe to your channel think this was. I know you said yourself that you think it was a skinwalker, and there are some other people that I've talked to that say skinwalker too. If these things are real, then please help us. Now, I'm not saying God help us, because I still don't believe in God either, but really I'm at a loss for words. I'm at a loss in my belief system. I've spent my entire life thinking that none of these things existed, but what I saw that night is really making me reconsider my beliefs. So please, let your creatures of the night tell me what their theories are. Thank you, Michelle. It's taken a long time to finally identify what exactly that creature was that charged me all those years ago in that small park in southern Indiana. You see, it happened back in the Dark Ages, in the summer of 1993. The internet was unheard of. Home computers were very rare. Phones were still for houses, and UB40 was tearing up the airwaves with their rendition of Elvis Presley's classic, I Can't Help Falling in Love with You. I was 16 that summer. It was one of those summers I'll never forget. A lot happened to me that summer. From riding around in a stolen car, moving away from all of my friends, and even learning how to play chess. It was a summer to remember, for sure. Still though, after all these years, the one event that stands out over all the rest was the night I came face to face with what I call Piggly Wiggly. I'm now 41, and that sighting has changed the way that I look at the world and nature, but especially the way that I think about the supernatural. I didn't know much about cryptids at that time. Like I said, no internet. I had of course heard of Bigfoot and thought it was a myth, or perhaps a case of mistaken identity. I'd seen werewolf movies, of course, but at that time thought they were nothing more than folklore and Hollywood nonsense. I thought they were made up to scare people in the days of the Salem witch hunts, or to keep children close to their homes at night. I don't believe like that anymore. I can't. I have been forever changed by what I encountered that summer night. I was never much of a stoner. Pot always had effects on me that I deemed less than enjoyable. First, it always made me very, very paranoid. Second, it made me very hungry. And lastly, very sleepy. Despite never really enjoying it, I would partake from time to time with friends, just in the spirit of going along to get along. Such was the case the first time Piggly Wiggly ever entered my reality. Jeremy was new to the apartment complex, but he and I hit it off right away. He also got along with my very best friend Charlie. Jeremy had a very troubled home life, and his mother was a very avid pot smoker. Thus, he had access to it pretty much all the time. One day, he invited Charlie and me to go out into the woods with him, behind the apartments, so we could smoke a little. I say the woods in quotations, as they're not really what I think of when I think of woods. Not the kind of area you would expect to experience nature or anything like that at all. It was just a bunch of trees for maybe 2 or 3 football fields in length, and as wide as 2 or 3 football fields as well. It had basically one trail that led from the apartments to a little park where we used to go play basketball. Apart from that, it had a creek bed that ran adjacent to the trail on the south side, with maybe another 50 to 100 yards of woods as far as the side of the creek. And then it was just houses. Lots of houses. So, like I said, not a place you would expect to encounter nature. I had lived with my dad in West Virginia for several years, and had hiked up in the real woods and encountered real nature. We even had a face-to-face encounter with a bear once on an afternoon hike in a West Virginia state park. At that time, I doubted if these little woods even had deer. I'd seen squirrels, of course, but that's all I figured lived in that tiny section of woods. One important thing to note, however, is that on the north side of the woods was a park, and it had a fenced-in rock quarry. Anyone who has ever studied deep underground military bases might find this fact interesting. I don't know if this quarry was linked to any of those supposed underground secret bases, but it's just an interesting side note. Anyways, as I was saying, the three of us walked back into the woods to find a safe place to smoke. We got far enough off the trail where we felt secure, and actually came all the way to the creek. We decided this was secluded enough to smoke a little. We took turns hitting the joint, and as one of us would smoke, the other two would kind of face away from the creek, just watching towards the trail to make sure that nobody was heading our way. I had hit it 2 or 3 times already, and felt that first wave of paranoia start to creep in. I was thinking, I sure hope the FBI aren't out here on patrol. Now, I know, the thought of FBI agents in a tiny wooded section of a local neighborhood park is absurd, but remember, pot always made me stupid paranoid. The thought was still in my head when I heard the sounds for the first time. They were from the other side of the creek. I heard footsteps running in a mad dash, running down the creek bed, splashing through the shallow water. I knew that all that was left for the runner to do was come up to the creek bed that was on our side of the creek, exactly where Charlie was standing and smoking the joint. Jeremy and I were facing the other way, but we both heard the splashing water, and I think most of southern Indiana must have heard Charlie when he screamed, "Run!" We darted off through the woods and back towards the trail. I had this visual image in my head as I darted off, of 2 men with blue windbreakers and ball caps with the letters FBI on them, hot on our trail. I ran even faster, not sure exactly where Charlie and Jeremy were in relation to me. I could hear them, but I was running so hard that my eyes had started to tear up, and mixed with the buzz from the THC, it was as if I was running through a tunnel, and everything in my peripheral vision was darkened. I just kept listening for my friends' footsteps, and adjusting my direction towards them. As I was running, I ran right through a giant spiderweb. You see, this park was full of these nasty spiderwebs that year. They were huge, perfectly circular, and made these large, nasty webs that were made by even larger and nastier black and yellow spiders. They were creepy, and I hate spiders. I realized I now had a thick web all over my head and stuck to my face, while still running full speed through the woods. If that wasn't bad enough, it got even worse. As I was wiping off the web from my face and out of my hair, one of those ugly spiders came dangling from my head and was swinging right in front of my face. I never touch bugs, especially spiders. I hate them with a passion. Still, without thinking about it, I swatted that ugly mother away from me, and the momentum made him sail through the air, but only right back into my face. About 90 seconds after the initial call to run, all 3 of us made it out of the woods, past the park, and into the neighborhood. Charlie had made it there first. I was last. I finally got rid of that spider, though. I saw Charlie slow down and begin to walk, and since he was the one who knew what was going on, I figured it was safe to stop running too. I looked at my friend and asked with full sincerity, "Was it the FBI?" "What?" "No," Charlie hesitantly said. "It was a monster." I laughed right away. Oh my goodness. Here I thought I was being chased by authorities, and it was one of my best friend's imaginations that caused us to run. His face was pale. He was shaking. And although I knew he was not joking, I couldn't help but tease him. "Yeah, right, like a Piggly Wiggly monster?" I don't know why I said that. I guess I'd seen a Piggly Wiggly grocery store once or twice in my lifetime, and that's why it came out of my mouth. I'll never know. Still, the name stuck, and all these years later the creature is still called that by my old friends and myself. I could tell Charlie didn't want to talk about it, but I couldn't let it go. We took the long way back to my apartment, navigating through the neighborhood streets and staying away from the woods. The whole way back I kept pressing him to talk to me, but he was very reluctant to speak. I was never known to go easy on my friends when they said or did something foolish, so I could understand why he didn't want to open up. He knew I didn't believe him already, and I had teased him when he first said it was a monster. But his behavior made me think it was more than just that, though. It seemed almost as if he was hiding something from me. Charlie and I didn't hide anything from each other, especially in those days. We were closer than brothers. We knew everything about one another. Or, so I thought, I guess. When we got back to my place, Charlie said there was something he wanted to tell us. He said it's something he was sworn to secrecy about, and that's why he had never told me. By this time, my buzz was gone, and if the chase didn't sober me up, this completely surprising revelation that Charlie had a secret that he never shared with me was plenty enough to do the trick. The next part of this story is what happened to Charlie about 3 years prior to that day. He says he was camping with some friends in those woods very near to that park. If I remember correctly, there were about 6 of them in the tent that night. 2 of the boys were brothers that I met when I first moved into the apartments, but they moved very shortly after I got there. Besides the brothers and Charlie, I don't remember who else he said was there that night. It was dark, and the boys were in their tent telling stories and just doing what teenage campers do. He said they kept hearing a rustling sound, maybe 30 to 60 feet away from in some taller bush. They tried to ignore it at first, but it just wouldn't stop. A couple of the boys decided to take some flashlights and check it out. 2 of the boys walked out into the brush where the sound was coming from and shined their lights at the thing moving around. In horror, they both turned towards the tent where the other campers were watching with their heads sticking out of the zipper and yelled for everybody to run. At that point, this monster came charging at the boys. He headed straight towards the tent, and it was a mad scramble as the boys tried to get out of the tent and away from this beast. They left the tent and all their gear there, obviously. They all made it out safely and retreated to the apartment of the 2 brothers, where they all stayed for the rest of the night. They told their dad, who happened to be a police officer. He took their story seriously enough that he took another officer with him the next day and searched in the woods. From what Charlie told me, he said the brothers told him that their dad searched and searched the woods and found what appeared to be a homeless man sleeping near a creek bed near the quarry. This would have had to have been a different creek than the one that we were at that day, as the creek and the quarry were on opposite sides of the trail. I'm guessing this was beyond the no trespassing fence line that belongs to the quarry. The sleeping man woke up and saw the officers and ran. That's all he was told happened that day. But after that, the boys' dad called all the boys and warned them to never speak of this to anyone ever again. Then, the dad took the boys and moved away. This part I can confirm. The family did move away suddenly, right after I moved in. I sat there, taking all of this in. Charlie was not lying. He may have been completely wrong about what happened, as I was pretty sure he was. But what he was saying, he sincerely believed happened to him. I didn't believe there was a monster living in those shallow woods, not for a second. But still, the thought of it being true excited me. I had to know. I had to find out for myself. I decided we had to go out and find out. Jeremy was more of a skeptic than even I was, but he was all for the monster hunt as well. Charlie was very, very much against it though. It took a lot for me to convince him. I used the old reverse psychology trick saying, well, no one will believe you unless we see it for ourselves. And eventually, something I said finally got through to him, and he agreed to go with us. I came up with a plan to find the Piggly Wiggly monster. I would take some stakes out of my freezer and tie them to a tree about 3/4 of the way to the park along the trail. Then we would take some flashlights after dark and walk along the trail until we arrived at the park to see if this thing was real or not. We would stop along the way and see if the stakes were still hanging on the tree, or perhaps catch this supposed beast in the act of eating them. We went and enlisted 2 other friends of ours to join the search party. I told them my plan, and took one with me to verify that I set up the bait. I didn't want to be accused of rigging the outcome. We walked about 3/4 of the way to the park, and then I found a tree that would be an easy spot at night, and I climbed about 10 feet from the ground. I didn't want it to be low enough for a dog to get to it. I tied it up and we walked back. I have to say, I was growing very excited for this adventure. I spent the rest of the day telling other friends what we were doing and trying to get them to come along. In the end, though, only the original 5 said yes. That night, when it got dark, we met at my house. We only had 2 flashlights, and Charlie brought a small baseball bat. We went over the plans again. I told them we would walk the whole trail to the park, and on the way out we would check the bait. We stored it towards the woods, and we could just barely see the trail when one of the boys, who agreed to come Piggly Wiggly hunting, got cold feet and said, "I have to go home and take a dump." Of course, I used this to tease him of being a scaredy cat. Honestly though, I couldn't remember how anyone would want to miss out on this fun. So now we were 4. As we approached the woods, I was surprised to see how timid Jeremy had become. He believed in this story less than any of us, yet I could sense a little fear oozing from him. I wasn't afraid at all, and decided to take the lead position. Besides, I was the one that hung the stakes, and would know when we got to that tree. It was dark on that trail. The treetops covered any light the moon could have supplied. It still seemed fun to me as we began down that trail towards the park. I knew everyone behind me was a little scared, but honestly, I don't think I was. Not yet, anyways. I'd spent so much time in much deeper woods, often by myself, and this to me was not really the woods at all, so there was nothing for me to be afraid of. Besides, I kept telling myself, nothing could live in this tiny wooded area. However, out of respect for Charlie, who I knew didn't want to be there, I decided not to clown around and try to scare the others. We were only about a quarter of the way to the park when those sounds started. It sounded like something came from the direction we were headed to. I swear, it sounded like someone or something was breaking sticks. Snap, snap, and then nothing for a few minutes. And then snap, snap, snap. I had to admit that that was weird. But in my mind, only a human would be doing that. Why would a Piggly Wiggly monster be breaking sticks? Then again, why would a person be at the park at night breaking sticks either? It made no sense to me either way. As we progressed, the sound was louder and louder as we got closer to the park, and I did start to get that creepy feeling in my stomach. Because the others too were getting creeped out by the sounds as well, a mutiny was about to begin. The other guys were talking about going back. I kept trying to press them by saying, "Just a little further to the tree, guys. We have to see if the stake is still up there." I used all the power of persuasion that I had acquired in my 16 years on Earth. I didn't want to turn back yet, and by now, I was a little creeped out too, and I definitely didn't want to go the rest of the way by myself. After what seemed like it took 3 times the normal amount of time, we finally arrived at that tree. I took a flashlight and began to search for my stakes. By this time, the cracking of sticks had stopped, and it was very quiet all around us. Too quiet all around us. I waved my flashlight to and fro and back and forth. Nothing. The stakes were gone. Admittedly, now I was very creeped out. What in these woods could climb a tree? What in these woods would even eat a steak? I felt fear begin to grow in my bosom. I did not want to let it show, though. I said, "Let's get out of here," in the most calm voice that I could muster at that moment. I was the leader, and I decided we were closer to the park than the apartments. The park had lights on the far end and houses just past it. I wanted so badly to be in that neighborhood by this time. Besides, we'd not heard the breaking stick sounds from the park for several minutes. I didn't run. I didn't want to spook the others, but I did pick up the pace tremendously, and nobody there complained about that. The 4th kid that joined was whimpering a little the rest of the way, which actually made me more afraid. I kept thinking to myself, what have I gotten us into? Then we came to the end of the trail and out of the woods. I was relieved. Not too far off the street were their lights and all the houses. We kept on walking right through the park, and that's when I saw it. Piggly Wiggly. Or more accurately, something that looked a lot like a werewolf. It was standing just outside the moonlight in the shadows of a park picnic shelter. It was far enough away that I couldn't get a great bit of detail, but close enough to know it wasn't human. It was standing on 2 legs, a little hunched over, hairy, with long, strong arms, and maybe 6 foot tall when standing erect. At first, I thought it was my imagination. It had to be my imagination playing tricks on me. It's hard to describe what you think when your natural mind comes into contact with the supernatural. It's confusing and overwhelming, and very real, and yet unbelievable all at once. It feels very similar to being in a dream. The boy behind me who had been whimpering stopped walking as well. I could tell he too was seeing what I was seeing. And then Charlie spotted the figure. All this seemed like minutes, but was actually only seconds. The creature was definitely staring at us. Then he stood up, and now seeing it shift position, I knew it was not my imagination anymore. We took off and sprinted to the house line just outside the park. When this thing stood up, it was well over 6 feet tall. We were gasping in disbelief. When we stopped, we were talking over one another about what we just saw. You see, when Charlie told us the story, he never told us what it looked like. What the heck was that thing? We kept asking over each other. A monkey? A Bigfoot? A werewolf? We were all teared up and in shock. Well, all of us except Jeremy. Because you see, he was the last in our single file line, and by the time he reached the end of the woods where we had all spotted the Piggly Wiggly, the three of us had already taken off running. He hadn't seen anything, but not wanting to be left alone, he ran with us. Still afraid, but now annoyed, I thought to myself, great. Without Jeremy, the most skeptical of all of us, to collaborate this story, we might as well have not even seen this thing at all. Without Jeremy believing us, this whole expedition was fruitless. I had to make him believe, and the only way for me to do that was to show him this creature myself. The other two boys refused to take one step closer to the park. They were much wiser than I was. I walked back about 200 feet or so with Jeremy. I stayed within the light of the street lamp that lit up the driveway of the park. I felt for some reason that being in the light we were safe. I have no idea why I thought that. We could see the picnic shelters fine from there, but I didn't see the monster at all. He was gone. I was bummed that the monster was no longer standing where he was before. I thought, great, now he's gonna think we're all crazy, just like how I thought Charlie was all day. That serves me right, I guess. I sighed very heavily in defeat and said to him, "He was right over there, man, I swear." I pointed to the dark shelter. But as I turned to where Jeremy had been standing, I noticed I was all alone. Jeremy was gone. I thought to myself, what the hell is that all about? As I straightened my head back to its natural position, I saw Piggly Wiggly charging at me full speed. He was already within the light of the street lamp, and now I had a perfect view of this freak from less than 20 feet away. It had a long muzzle like a wolf. It was covered in brown fur with some grays mixed in. Around its head was even longer hair, almost like a lion's mane. It was very muscular, and when it ran, it would touch its arms like an ape to the ground for stability. Its face was canine, not quite like a wolf, but definitely a dog. I took all this in as I breathed in a very tight and shallow breath. My mind was processing information at a rapid pace as fight or flight kicked in. I sure as hell had no intentions of fighting. I turned and ran faster than I ever had or ever have since. I even passed Jeremy, who had spotted the beast before me and failed to say anything to me before fleeing. Some people might think that was a turd-headed move, as I did at that time. Later, though, he admitted to me he tried to yell, but in fear, nothing came out of his mouth. He had seen this thing as it approached us before it came into the light. He didn't get a great detail, but he saw enough to satisfy his skeptical mind. He knew he was looking at a bipedal dog creature. He would later describe it as a dog bear, looking like an ape when it ran. We finally made it back home safely. I took my dog to the park the next day. She was going nuts. I let her go and she kept barking at a tree that had fallen. I inspected the tree and noticed a bunch of broken sticks beside it. I immediately thought of the sounds from the night before, and then I noticed something else. It was inside a hollow tree. Bones. Lots of small animal bones. I don't know if they were local dogs or squirrels or what. I don't know, and I didn't bother to find out.
I've never hunted the Piggly Wiggly monster again after that. Now, thanks to the internet and the collective hive mindset, I'm fairly certain that what almost caught me all those years ago was a dogman. Probably the Type 3 variation. It wasn't a bear or a lion. It wasn't a Sasquatch. It wasn't an ape or a werewolf. Yes, it had characteristics of all of these, but it was very much canine. It was a dogman. I like to camp, and I like to hike in the woods, but now I never go alone. More than that, I never ever go into the woods after dark. You never know what's watching you.
I had an experience that scared the living hell out of me, to the point I became obsessed with the paranormal and anything that is haunted. I'm not sure if what I encountered was a ghost or a demonic entity, but I do know that it was real, and it was terrifying. And it wasn't just my imagination, because 2 other people experienced the same thing at the same time that I did. To start, my name is Alicia. I'm 32 years old, and this happened 6 years ago. My brother Paul, our friend Jorge, and me went on a camping trip to Lake Morena in Campo, California. This was supposed to be a weekend where we just hung out and forgot about the city and our problems and drama, which is exactly what it was. During the day. We got up there on a Friday. Our plan was to relax that day, go on a hike the day after that, pack up early on Sunday, and arrive home with enough time to unpack and chill out Sunday afternoon. We ended up only staying there Friday. By the time the sun rose on Saturday morning, we were already gone. The first thing that struck me as odd was this sound, like a woman talking, except I was the only woman around. I guess it could have been the wind carrying someone else's voice, but with everything that happened to us that night, everything we experienced as a group, I'm not so sure that there was a woman that was there at all. After the voice, which I just brushed off, the sun started setting. And the way the atmosphere changed around this camp area was literally night and day. When the sun was up, we were all happy. Everything was fine. But as soon as the sun went down, all 3 of us just got this terrible feeling, like dread or sorrow. I didn't know it at the time. I thought I was the only one that felt it. But after talking with Paul and Jorge later, they felt the same way that I was feeling. Then the temperature dropped. I know it does this when the sun goes down, but this was a very noticeable drop. Even Jorge mentioned how cold it was. And this is a guy that wears shorts and flip-flops all year long. I was freezing. I huddled by the campfire for a long time, just trying to get warm. The bad feeling only continued to get worse. I felt like something bad was going to happen. And at the same time, I also felt like something bad already happened. But not now. In the past. It's hard to explain. But I felt like where we were, we shouldn't have been there. Because the area was wrong somehow. Paul and Jorge started getting creeped out too. I guess that's when they started feeling the feelings that I was already feeling. Sad and scared. Like I said, we already had a fire going, but Jorge turned on a lantern too, to help illuminate our table we'd set up. Keep that in mind. It comes into play in a minute. All 3 of us heard the sound of crunching leaves, and Paul jumped up with his flashlight to see if he could find out where the sound was coming from. There wasn't anybody there. All of us clearly heard someone walking in the leaves. Paul started getting upset. He said something wasn't right, and that's when I really started to panic. He might be my younger brother, but he's one of the bravest people I've ever met. And if he was starting to get upset, something was definitely wrong. The panic only made the feelings worse. I remember sitting at the fire, and I was so scared I was shaking. And I still couldn't even tell why I was so scared. It was just a feeling that I had. I was sweating, but at the same time I was still freezing cold. The fire had absolutely no effect on me. I was chilled to the bone, and I was only getting colder and more scared. I realized that Jorge wasn't doing any better than I was. He looked like he was going to be sick. He was breathing heavy and kept putting his face in his hands. I asked if he was okay, and he said he just felt sick. Paul was rubbing his arms, trying to warm up. I remember how he looked around. He was nervous. He said, "Man, I don't like this place. It's giving me the creeps." I agreed and said I wouldn't mind leaving the next day. Paul almost looked like he was going to agree, but I know how much he loves being outdoors. So I think he could brave everything that we were facing, just so he could stay outside. Then we also started hearing what sounded like a woman crying, but it didn't sound close. The part that's hard to explain is, even though it didn't sound close, it didn't sound far away either. It was almost like someone turned the volume down on a TV. It was just a low, quiet cry. Then my lantern started to dim, and the batteries died. This was completely not what was supposed to happen. I put those batteries in myself. I opened the brand new pack of batteries, myself. They shouldn't have been dead. The lantern was only on for about 15 minutes. I turned it on and off a few times, took the batteries out and put them back in, but they were still completely dead. The three of us sat around the campfire in silence. I think each one of us was trying to control the feelings we had, and we were trying not to let our fear get the best of us. What happened next was the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. I was talking to myself in my head, telling myself this was all silly, and we were three grown-ups that were just letting our imagination get to us. Then I looked up at my brother and saw something behind him. What I saw was this black mass. It was shaped like a man. I saw a head, shoulders, arms, a torso, except that there was nobody there behind him. It looked like a shadow of a person, but this thing was a solid mass, and there was nothing to cast a shadow on. It was standing up, and it was about 5 feet behind my brother. I bolted to my feet, screaming for Paul to get up. He listened and jumped to his feet, turning around and shining his flashlight around. Nothing was there. I have no idea where the shadow person went, but that was enough for me. I started putting all my stuff in the car. I was getting the hell out of there. Paul wanted to stay until morning, but Jorge agreed with me. He wanted to leave too. Now, know this about Jorge and Paul. They've been best friends since they were 12 years old, and the times one of them has taken my side instead of each other's, I can probably count on one hand. Jorge wanted to get out of there just as bad as I did. I didn't even want to pack. I just wanted to go. There was something in these woods that I didn't understand, and I didn't want to have any more encounters with it. Paul picked up on my terror and said we could just come back for the rest of the stuff in the morning. Then our other lantern went out, which I also put batteries in myself. Now I can understand one lantern turning off. Maybe the batteries were faulty. But 2 lanterns within 10 minutes of each other? That's just unheard of. It just doesn't happen. I was already at a 10 at this point. This probably sent me to a 30. I was terrified. I got in the car and told the boys I was leaving right now, and if they didn't want to be stuck here all night, they'd better get in the car with me. They got in the car. We ended up sleeping in the car that night on the side of a road. We talked about what we saw for a little while. Paul was the first person to say the word ghost, and neither of us argued with him though. I was thinking the same thing. I just couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. About an hour later, maybe a little less, I finally managed to calm down enough to fall asleep. The next morning we went back and packed up the rest of our stuff, and then we went home. It was only after all this shit happened that we found out the history of Lake Morena and the paranormal encounters that people have there. I read that there have been all sorts of sightings. A woman in white, disembodied voices, footsteps that sound like they're right next to you and then just disappear, UFO encounters, full-bodied apparitions, personal objects disappearing and then reappearing in odd places, and there was even an account of a woman who woke up to find a baby's christening gown floating up to her in the cabin that she was sleeping in. And then it floated back to where she first saw it, and the thing disappeared completely. I also learned later that Jorge saw the shadow figure when I did, but he didn't want to add to the fear that night. Instead, he just agreed with me that we needed to leave. But he was just as afraid as I was. I will never go back there unless I'm with a team of professionals that are doing an investigation. And even then, I don't know if I could overcome the fear that I felt that night. Thank you for sharing this. Alicia.